It started with a child. Not a crowd, not a security alert. Not someone shouting or running. Just a small girl in a yellow raincoat standing very still on the pavement outside St. James's Palace, pointing at a white van parked 40 meters down the road. And whispering. That's the part nobody talks about when they retell this story. They always jump straight to what happened after. The ceremony stopping, the gates closing, the scramble. But I was there that morning, standing close enough to see her face, and what I remember most is how quiet she was, how serious, like she already knew something the rest of us didn't. It was a Thursday in late October. One of those London mornings that can't make up its mind. Cloud cover, thin sun, a breeze that kept pulling at scarves and hat brims. The leaves on the mall were doing that slow, wet drift onto the pavement. The kind of autumn detail you only notice when you've got nowhere urgent to be. I was there because my sister had flown in from Edinburgh specifically to watch the changing of the guard. She'd been talking about it for 2 years, had it printed on her itinerary. So there we were, standing in the press of tourists near the Stable Yard Road entrance to St. James's, about 40 minutes before the ceremony was due to begin. The crowd was a proper mix. Japanese tourists with cameras on straps, a school group in matching high-vis vests being managed by 3 increasingly tired-looking teachers. American couples checking Google Maps on their phones, a few Londoners who'd clearly just wandered past and stopped out of habit. That particular blend of people you only get at these things. Nobody really knows each other. Everyone's looking in slightly different directions. Everyone's waiting. The guards were already in position. 2 of them at the gate, the tall bearskins making them look like they'd been cut out of a different era and pasted into this one. They were still, properly still. The way only trained soldiers can be, not frozen but settled, like they'd decided to become part of the architecture for a while. My sister was taking photos. I was watching the crowd. I do that at these things. I find the people more interesting than the ceremony. The way a kid reacts to the guards, the way tourists calculate how close they can get before they feel embarrassed, the way the guards' eyes track without their heads moving. There's a whole silent performance happening alongside the official one. That's when I first saw her. She was maybe 5 or 6. A little older perhaps, it's hard to say. She had a yellow raincoat with the hood down, dark hair, and the expression of someone who has just worked something out. She was with who I assumed was her grandmother, a small, white-haired woman in a proper wool coat who was looking at her phone and not, at that moment, looking at the child. The girl had separated herself by about 2 steps. Not dramatically, just enough to be slightly outside the group she'd come with. She was standing very still, facing one of the guards, the one posted closer to the small side gate rather than the main entrance, and she was looking at him with an expression I can only describe as deliberate. Like she'd made a decision. I watched her take one small step toward him. The guard's eyes moved. That was all, just the eyes. His head stayed perfectly level, his chin up, his hands at his sides. But his gaze tracked down to her the way a very controlled person's gaze does when something unexpected enters their space. She said something. I couldn't hear it. The crowd noise, the low hum of voices, a bus going past on the road behind, a child somewhere in the school group saying something loud in a foreign language. All of it meant her words didn't reach me. But I could see her mouth moving, slowly, clearly, the way a child speaks when they want to make sure they're understood. And then she pointed. She raised her right arm and extended one finger, the way children do when they're absolutely certain about something, pointing not at the guard, not at the gate, but down the road, past the edge of the gathered crowd, past the iron railings and the parked vehicles along the far side. At a white transit van. It had been there for a while. I'd registered it without registering it, the way you do with vehicles that are simply part of the street, parked against the curb. No markings. Engine off, as far as I could tell, nothing obviously out of place. But the girl was pointing at it like it mattered. The guard looked. Again, just the eyes at first. But then, and this was the moment I started paying proper attention, he broke his stance. Not dramatically. Not in a way that made everyone around me immediately panic. But he shifted his weight. He looked directly at the van, and something changed in his posture, a kind of alertness that made the stillness of a moment before seem, in retrospect, like sleep. He spoke into his radio. It was brief, a few words. His expression didn't change. But his hand had gone to the receiver on his lapel and he was talking, quietly and quickly, while still looking at the van. The girl watched him. She didn't move. She just watched with that same serious, settled expression. When he looked back down at her, something passed between them. I couldn't tell you exactly what. An acknowledgement, maybe. A nod so small it barely qualified as one. Her grandmother looked up from her phone, noticed the child had drifted, and closed the two-step gap with the practiced efficiency of a grandparent who's done this 1,000 times. She said something, took the girl's hand. The girl went quietly, but she looked back over her shoulder at the guard once just before she was absorbed back into the crowd. For maybe 3 minutes, nothing seemed to happen. That's the part that's hard to convey. The ceremony preparations continued. The crowd shuffled and chattered. My sister got a good shot of the guard with the main gate in the background. Someone nearby offered someone else a bite of a croissant, and they debated it loudly. Normal, completely normal. And then it wasn't. I noticed the second guard first, the one at the far end, speak into his radio. Then I saw someone in plain clothes, a man in a dark jacket who'd been standing near the perimeter in a way that now seemed very deliberate, begin moving quietly but purposefully toward the van. Then another. 3 people in plain clothes, converging from slightly different angles, none of them running, none of them shouting, but moving with the particular controlled urgency of people who have been trained to not create a scene, while nonetheless treating something as serious. The nearest guard, the one the girl had spoken to, took 3 steps to his right. Not many, but enough to angle himself between the crowd and the van's direction, enough to change what he was facing. Someone senior appeared at the gate. I couldn't see a rank, but you could tell from the way the guard's posture adjusted slightly when this person spoke to him. Brief exchange. Then the senior figure disappeared back through the gate, and seconds later I heard, not shouting, but a firm series of announcements from stewards near the front of the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to ask you to step back. Please move back from the gate. Step back, please. Politely said, clearly said. The crowd stirred. My sister lowered her camera. What's happening? I don't know, I said, but I had a feeling. The ceremony didn't begin on time. That's not supposed to happen. The changing of the guard runs on a schedule that has, for most people's lifetimes, been as reliable as anything in this city. You can set your watch. Tourists plan their entire mornings around it. So when the clock moved past the start time and nothing had moved and the gates stayed closed, and the stewards were still managing the crowd backward in small, insistent steps, people noticed. Phones came out. People started filming before they even knew what they were filming. I could see the van from where I was standing, though not well. The plainclothes officers, there were 4 now, I thought, though it was hard to be certain, were positioned around it. There was a conversation happening between one of them and someone I couldn't see properly, possibly the driver, near the front of the vehicle. It didn't look aggressive. It looked like the kind of conversation where one party is being very firm and the other party is beginning to realize how firm. About 12 minutes after the ceremony was due to start, 2 police vehicles came around the corner. No sirens. That was the detail that struck me, no sirens. Just 2 marked cars moving at pace, pulling up along the far curb with the kind of quiet authority that means business without announcing itself. The crowd was properly unsettled by now, not panicking. But that particular London crowd tension had set in, people craning, people speculating, people who'd been mildly interested suddenly very interested. A woman near me said she'd seen something on Twitter. Someone else said they'd heard it was a gas leak. Someone else said that wasn't it. I didn't look at my phone. I kept watching the guard. He'd returned to something approximating his position. He was still, but he was watching the van with the full, open attention of someone no longer performing stillness, actually inhabiting it. His hands were at his sides, but the fingers weren't quite as relaxed. Small detail. The kind you only catch when you've been watching long enough. It was another 7 minutes before the crowd got any kind of information. A steward came through and said, calmly and without drama, that there had been a security precaution and that the ceremony would be delayed but would proceed. He thanked everyone for their patience and asked them to remain behind the line. A security precaution. That phrase can mean anything. In London, it usually means something specific enough that no one is going to tell you exactly what it means. What I can tell you is what I saw next, because I was in a position to see it. The back doors of the van were opened by two of the officers, not kicked or forced, properly opened with a key or handle by someone who had either been given access or had compelled access. I was too far to see inside. I don't know what was in there. I genuinely don't. But the reaction of the officers, a brief exchange, someone photographing something with a small device, someone making another call, was enough to tell me it hadn't been a gas leak and it hadn't been nothing. The driver, or whoever had been at the front of the vehicle, was walked to one of the police cars. Not handcuffed from what I could see, but walked, accompanied. With a hand lightly on the upper arm in that way, that means you're going somewhere whether you'd choose to or not. The van stayed where it was. More officers arrived. An exclusion zone went up, orange cones, a strip of police tape, two officers in high-vis flanking it. And the crowd watched all of this happen in the particular hush that settles over a group of people when something serious has occurred, and nobody knows quite how serious. The ceremony did eventually take place. About 40 minutes late. Abbreviated, I think it felt slightly shorter than what my sister had described from reading about it, but it happened. The gates opened, the guards moved, the whole ancient choreography played out with exactly the precision it always does, and tourists raised their cameras, and the school group cheered, and the guards looked through all of it with the particular distant focus that is their trademark. My sister got her photos, but she kept looking back toward where the van had been. We both did. Afterward, walking down the mall toward St. James's Park, she asked me what I thought had been in it. I said I didn't know. She asked if I thought the little girl had known something, or if it had just been a coincidence, a child pointing at a random van and a guard who happened to take it seriously at exactly the right moment. I thought about that for a while. I think that's the wrong way to frame it, actually. Whether the girl knew exactly what she'd seen or just sensed something off, the way children sometimes do, unfiltered, before the world teaches them to second-guess themselves, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that she said something. She walked up to a 6-foot guard in a bearskin hat who was professionally, institutionally obligated to ignore her, and she said something anyway. And he listened. That's the part that has stayed with me, not the van, not the police cars or the orange cones or the ceremony running 40 minutes behind schedule. The guard listening. That small, deliberate choice to hear a child out when every convention of his role told him to look past her. There's a version of that morning where he doesn't, where the training and the tradition and the stillness holds, and he keeps his eyes front, and the van stays a van until something happens or it doesn't, where the ceremony starts on time, where nobody has to make a decision. He made a decision. A small girl in a yellow raincoat pointed at something, and he decided to believe her. I looked back once before the park path curved, and the palace disappeared behind the trees. The tape was still up. The van was still there. A photographer from somewhere, press, maybe, or just someone opportunistic with a good camera, was standing at the edge of the cordon, pointing a long lens at nothing in particular. The crowd had thinned. The school group was gone. The tourists had shuffled on to the next thing on their itineraries. The guard who had listened was back at his post, exactly as he'd been, still, settled, bearskin level, eyes front. Like nothing had happened. Like everything had.